Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in Junior English, and we now turn in your hymnals to pages 1116, 1117 and following. We're going to now introduce ourselves to drama. Now, in your freshman year, most of us will have studied Shakespeare's classic Romeo and Juliet. In our sophomore year, most of us will have studied another dramatic piece, Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. Now in your junior year, we turn to a different kind of drama, the Crucible, Arthur Miller's play. We'll also end our junior B semester with a study of Arthur Miller's play, Death of a Salesman. And then just to finish out our curriculum understandings in the senior year, we normally will study then Shakespeare's Macbeth and Shakespeare's Hamlet. So a number of different plays or dramas will be studied. Let's go ahead and just review, because I know most of this you already know on 1116, but let's just review together some information about drama, and then let's introduce ourselves to this text called Crucible, the Crucible. Notice that you have an Alfred Hitchcock, a famous movie maker, quote here, "Drama is life with the dull bits cut out." That's funny to say because a lot of my students have often said that that's funny because some of the plays that you've made us study have lots of dull bits and parts in them. Okay, I stand corrected. Let's define drama here, shall we? A drama or a play is a story written to be performed by actors. Unlike a short story or novel, a drama presents action mainly through dialogue. I hope all these bold words are in your notes. The conversation and speeches of characters. A play typically includes several other key literary elements. Of course, we have plot, the ordered sequence of events in a play. Plays often divided into large units called acts, which can then be subdivided into smaller ones called scenes. We have characters, people who participate in the action of the play and are portrayed on stage or on screen by actors. You have stage directions. This is a big one. You want to write this one down because in some ways we've not seen this in our previous 2 years with Shakespeare as much as we're going to see it with Arthur Miller. Notes included in the play to describe sets, costumes, lighting, sound, props, and in some cases the ways in which actors should move and deliver their lines. We're going to see quite a bit of this with Arthur Miller's Crucible, the Crucible. We have types of drama, so let's make this observation. Ever since the development of Western drama in ancient Greece, plays have been divided into two broad categories. Comedy, a drama that ends happily. Comedies may be funny, but humor is not their defining trait. And tragedy is a drama that shows the downfall of a noble but flawed figure called the tragic hero. Note that some plays, including several by Shakespeare, mix elements of both categories or otherwise bend their definitions. We should point out here, just for your notes for a second, that the great exemplar of this idea is the Greek philosopher Aristotle, who said in a classic essay called Poetics, you want to write that down, Poetics, he said that tragedy is going to be about the downfall of the protagonist, the hero, because of some kind of tragic flaw, hamartia. This is usually going to be considered some kind of excessive pride, hubris. And during the downfall then, the audience goes through a process of catharsis and purgation as they experience both fear and pity. I've given a full lecture on this idea, and you can find it on learnstrong.net if you're interested in reviewing that kind of information. What we're going to study, though, is something called modern realistic drama. Let's take a look at it back to your text. While some modern playwrights experiment with fantasy or absurdity, many more write realistic plays that feature recognizable settings and characters. For some modern playwrights, the realistic play is also a vehicle for social and political criticism. That last line I would read again and write down for sure. Social and political realism. And then we've got some kinds of examples of modern realistic drama there at the bottom of 1116. We've got a model for you to study on 1117, the Lorraine Hansberry cutting from A Raisin in the Sun, a really famous play of the American literary tradition. Let's introduce ourselves now to Arthur Miller. There he is on 1118 and 1119. Notice his dates, 1915 to 2005. Let's read together. A legend of the modern American theater. Arthur Miller has chronicled the dilemmas of common people pitted against powerful and unyielding social forces. A native New Yorker, Miller lived through bad times as well as good. During the Depression, his family's business went bankrupt. Although Miller graduated from high school in '32, he was forced to delay his enrollment at the University of Michigan for more than 2 years in order to raise money for tuition. He did so by working at a variety of jobs, including singing for a local radio station, driving a truck, and working as a stock clerk in an automobile parts warehouse. Let's just pause for a moment and put this in our notes. How many American authors are defined by the experience we just read of having to go out into the real world and work real jobs before they become artists, or sometimes professional academics and artists or writers or whatever. Of course, that's significant because then they're able to kind of draw on those experiences and to represent then real life people in real life ways because they've had the experience of it, you know what I mean? Promising playwright is our next heading. Let's read. Miller first began writing drama while still in college. In 1947, his play All My Sons opened on Broadway to immediate acclaim, establishing Miller as a bright new talent. 2 years later, he won international fame and the Pulitzer Prize for The Death of a Salesman, 1949. You want to write that one down? We will study that one together later. Critics hailed as a modern American tragedy. His next play, The Crucible, in 1953, was less warmly received because of its political content. Miller drew a parallel between the hysteria surrounding the witchcraft trials in Puritan New England and the post-war climate of McCarthyism, Senator Joseph McCarthy's obsessive quest to uncover Communist Party affiliation of American institutions. We'll have more to say about this in a bit. In the introduction to his collected plays, 1957, Miller described his perceptions of the atmosphere during the McCarthy era and the way in which those perceptions influenced the writing of The Crucible. He said, quote, "It was as though the whole country had been born anew, without a memory even of certain elemental decencies which a year or two earlier no one would have imagined could be altered, let alone forgotten. Astounded, I watched men pass me by without a nod, whom I had known rather well for years. And again, the astonishment was produced by my knowledge, which I could not give up, that the terror in these people was being knowingly planned and consciously engineered, and yet that all they knew was terror. So that so interior and subjective an emotion could have been so manifestly created from without was a marvel to me. It underlies every word in The Crucible. We're going to see more of this here in a bit. In the Shadows of McCarthyism is the next heading. During the 2 years following the publication and production of The Crucible, Miller was investigated himself for possible associations with the Communist Party. In 1956, he was called to testify before the House Committee on Un-American Activities, the HUAC. By the way, I'm reading at the top of page 1119 now. Although he had never joined the Communist Party, Miller and many of his contemporaries had advocated principles of social justice and equality among the classes. He had become disillusioned, however, by the reality of communism as practiced in the Soviet Union. In the HUAC hearings, he testified about his own experiences, but he refused to discuss his colleagues and associates. He was found guilty of contempt of Congress for his silence. The sentence was later overturned. So it was a remarkable time in American history when artists of all kinds were brought in front of this committee led by Joseph McCarthy, and the plan was to somehow disgrace all of these people who had some affiliations with communism. When we study The Crucible, then, we're going to see some similarities, obviously, between the witch hunts of the Salem witch trials and this situation with McCarthyism. Hollywood glamour. In 1956, the spotlight focused on Miller's personal life when he married glamorous film star Marilyn Monroe. Although he wrote very little during their 5-year marriage, he did pen the screenplay for a film, The Misfits, in 1961, in which Monroe starred. After the marriage ended, Miller wrote other noteworthy plays, including After the Fall, 1964, The Price, 1968, and The Last Yankee, 1993. Our last heading, A Voice of Conscience. Arthur Miller died in 2005 at the age of 89. Playwright Edward Albee said of him, quote, "Arthur never compromised. He never sold out. He never did anything just for that awful word, entertainment. He was able to use art and his enormously important social and political points and make them so skillfully that people never thought they were being hit over the head. Let's go ahead now and turn to 1120 and themes across time, author's insight, the words of Arthur Miller on The Crucible. So let's listen now to the very playwright himself. Of course, there again is the picture of him. Notice it says, Arthur Miller's The Crucible failed at the box office in its initial publication in 1953, but it has since become one of the most popular American plays of the 20th century. There's some debate about this. In fact, some will argue that the first performance of Miller's Crucible was actually in 1952, which is going to be interesting because we'll point out that Salem witch trials happened in 1692. You can do the quick mathematics to see the difference between the two, 1692 and 1952. So you can get a sense of the distance between these two. Let's go ahead now and read together the historical background of the Crucible. This will be important information for us. In Echoes Down the Corridor, published in 2000, Arthur Miller writes, quote, "It would probably never have occurred to me to write a play about the Salem witch trials of 1692 had I not seen some astonishing correspondences with that calamity in the America of the late 40s and early 50s. My basic need was to respond to a phenomenon which, with only small exaggeration, one could say was paralyzing a whole generation, and in an amazingly short time was drying up the habits of trust and toleration in public discourse. I refer, of course, to the anti-communist rage that threatened to reach hysterical proportions and sometimes did. I can't remember anyone calling it an ideological war, but I think now that that is what it amounted to. Looking back at the period, I suppose we very rapidly passed over anything like a discussion or debate and into something quite different, a hunt, not alone for subversive people, but ideas and even a suspect language. The next heading, the writing of the Crucible. Miller explains where his ideas for the Crucible came from, saying, quote, "On a lucky afternoon, I happened upon a book, The Devil in Massachusetts by Marion Starkey, a narrative of the Salem witch hunt of 1692. I knew this story from my college reading more than a decade earlier, but now, in this changed and darkened America, it turned a wholly new aspect toward me, namely, the poetry of the hunt." I would definitely write down that phrase, the poetry of the hunt. Poetry may seem an odd word for a witch hunt, but I saw now that there was something of the marvelous in the spectacle of the whole village, if not an entire province, whose imagination was literally captured by a vision of something that wasn't there, witchcraft. The top of page 1121. As I stood in the stillness of the Salem Courthouse, surrounded by the mimetic swirl of the images of the 1950s, but with my head in 1692, what the two eras had in common was gradually gaining definition. In both was the menace of concealed plots, but most startlingly were the similarities in the rituals of defense and the investigative routines. 300 years apart, both prosecutions were alleging membership in a secret, disloyal group. Should the accused confess, his honesty could be proved only in precisely the same way, by naming former Confederates, nothing less. Thus, the informer became the very proof of the plot and the investigator's necessity. The final heading, how the play has lasted. Musing on the eventual popularity of The Crucible, Miller says, quote, "The Crucible is my most produced play here and abroad, and it's part of the play's history, I think, not to people in so many parts of the world, and it is part of the play's history, I think, that to people in so many parts of the world, its story seems so like their own. In fact, I used to think half seriously, although it was not far from the truth, that you could tell when a dictator was about to take power in a Latin American country or when one had just been overthrown by whether the Crucible was suddenly becoming produced there." It's a fascinating insight. On page 1122, you can kind of see some of Arthur Miller's stars and some pictures there. Arthur Miller traveled in the circles of the rich, famous, the celebrated. He was at one time the husband of Marilyn Monroe. You can see a picture there. He became the father-in-law of Academy Award-winning actor Daniel Day-Lewis. Miller's works also drew actors with major star power eager for the opportunity to be part of a Miller production. You've got several really famous kinds of actors there and pictures of them. Let's now turn at the last part of our information here as introductory. And let's talk for a few minutes together now about Arthur Miller's play, Crucible. Let's do a quick review of the play just so we kind of know what we're doing. And let's talk about how we're going to study this play. Okay? We've also got to ask some questions about where this play is placed in our junior lit textbooks. It's in volume 2, what we call junior B. But we regularly will study the play in the first part of our junior experience of junior A, when we're studying about the Puritans and, of course, that time period, as we were calling it, of 1692. So let's now turn and talk for a few moments about this play. We'll do two things now together. One, we want to give a brief plot summary of the play. Two, we want to actually talk a little bit about how this play has been studied, how it has been viewed, how it has been considered so important in the history of American thought and American literature. Okay? First of all, let's just do a quick plot summary of the play. We're going to read the play together, obviously. Then we're going to view a performance of the play, directed actually by Arthur Miller, the Daniel Day-Lewis Winona Ryder, and you can see the pictures actually on page 1121, two of them that come from that very performance, and we'll study that performance together after we have read the play together and studied the play. Let's just review now what happens in this play. Ostensibly, the play's backdrop is the Salem witch trials of 1692. Now, you're going to learn a few things about the Salem witch trials of 1692 through the study of this play, no question. The play, however, really just follows the life of a couple of people. Some of them really were part of this, others may be a bit fictitious. The play is going to surround itself with the concerns of a couple of influential people, important people. One is a guy named John Proctor. The other is a girl named Abigail. John Proctor has a wife and children. Her name in the play will either be Elizabeth or it will be Goody Proctor. Okay? They had a girl who worked for them named Abigail. During the time that Abigail was working for them, Elizabeth, John Proctor's wife, got sick. And Abigail began to have more influence in the house. And after apparently a certain period of time, John Proctor and Abigail have an affair. So he sleeps around on his wife. Now, all of the information that I just told you is precedent to, before, the actual events of the play. Okay? However, they are important events, and here's why. Elizabeth Goody Proctor realizes that John and Abigail have hooked up. She fires Abigail. She gets rid of her. John promises that it was a one-time fling and it will never happen again. Elizabeth, his wife, wants to believe him. They get on with their life. However, Abigail does not. She is very interested in making sure that she and John can be a thing again. How to do it, though? Answer, believe it or not, witchcraft. She decides she is going to try to put a spell on John Proctor's wife and kill her. And then, of course, when she's dead, John will marry Abigail, and then Abigail can go on with her life. Now, all of that stands behind the opening scenes of the play. We come to learn, when the play opens, that Abigail Williams, along with a slave woman named Tituba and a whole bunch of other girls, have gone out into the woods, and they've done naughty out there with witchcraft. Okay? And Tituba has, in fact, tried to summon two dead children. And Abigail Williams has drunk blood, believing that somehow some kind of witchcraft type of experience can maybe lead to the death of Elizabeth Proctor. In the process, however, we have issues. The reverend of the town, his name is Paris, discovers what's going on in the middle of the woods. One of the girls is dancing naked and running around. The girls are dancing around this cauldron and all of that. So as the play opens, you've got his daughter, Paris, who was one of the Paris's daughter, Betty, one of the girls, actually has fainted and kind of gone into this like psychotic coma. And as the play opens, Paris and the rest of the town start to grow deeply concerned about what's going on. The play then will unfold with the certain kinds of trajectories understood. Let's list them and understand them. One, we are going to have some serious hysteria that will begin to take place in the town of Salem. Why? Because these people are all what we would call Puritans. They all believe in true embodied possibilities of witchcraft. They believe in this kind of thing, right? By the way, this is one of the problems with sometimes studying this play today. I have a lot of my students that are like, I cannot believe that people would take this kind of stuff seriously, that there's such a thing as people flying through the air and entering other people's bodies and all kinds of satanic forces in play. And yet, the Puritans really believe this stuff. And because they really believe this stuff, let's just put it in our notes now. We have hysteria that starts to happen. And pretty serious hysteria at that. Leading to, are you ready for this? The death of a good number of people who are hanged and killed in other ways for being witches or affiliated with witchcraft. Of course, the irony of all ironies is the one who started all of this, Abigail Williams, is in fact capable of staying alive all the way to the end of the play. Okay? Abigail, who is the one who started all of this, why? Because she desperately wanted to be with John Proctor, will ultimately be the cause of John Proctor's death at the end of the play. John Proctor will ultimately have to die. But in the final moments of the play, he will